Okay, so one of the first big topics the legislature will be taking up this year will be the gun background check redo, so to speak. Amy, this is something really that Democrats could do without Republican support.
And they will. The initiative was passed by a majority of Nevadans, so it makes sense to actually bring this back up. I'm not sure if this is the correct way because this is something that a incoming legislature after this one, if it were then to turn the tides, they could basically remove it.
Right, going through the legislative route.
A lot stronger, right? But with that initiative, from what I understand, it was the FBI that they were saying that they could not fully implement the background checks. So that's why at that time, Attorney General Laxalt and Governor Sandoval weren't able to move forward.
Hugh, one of the things that was pointed out is, well, hey, it was a majority. I mean, it passed by about 1%, but a majority of the voters wanted to implement it. It's a priority of the governor to get this, and the legislature to get this going now. So instead of waiting to go the constitutional route and going the initiative route, they just want to do the fix now. Is this the best solution, or is this a short-term solution until they can get it back out to the voters? What do you think about the path forward for this?
Well, I think that there's enough stuff in the Nevada Constitution already. It's ridiculously long. We always seem to want to go to make everything a constitutional amendment. We can do this through statute. I think maybe the more interesting thing to me about all this, though, as you point out, it passed with the voters in 2016. Not by a huge margin, but it passed. And the shift in public opinion on gun rights just generally, during this last campaign, you saw Democratic candidates, including Sisolak, Attorney General, everyone that's running for legislature, everyone that was running for federal offices on the Democratic side, running on stronger gun safety rules and regulations. That's something that you would not have seen even 7 years ago, 6 years ago. There's been a huge shift in public opinion. Politicians have picked up on that. This is not the only gun safety measure that the legislature will be dealing with this session. So that to me is kind of the more interesting, larger perspective going forward. And it's not just Nevada, of course, although Nevada is an interesting case because it is a western state where people like to have their guns. But nationally, there's been a shift in this public opinion that I think is kind of unexpected, not something that I would have predicted, again, 7, 8 years ago.
And I agree with you. And actually, you can throw in Republican candidate Danny Tarkanian, who actually came out in favor of banning bump stocks, including certain measures of background checks, as long as there were more common sense exceptions. For example, if you wanted to gift a gun to a family member, or if you were going to go hunting or to a shooting range with a friend and allow them to borrow one of your guns. But he's right. This has definitely been quite a surprise in turn of events for the way that we view background checks.
Is there something now that the legislators feel more compelled to get something done because they know voters are expecting them to do something now that this has become such a big part of the campaign?
Well, I think it is something that they did campaign on, and it's a campaign promise that they want to keep. But I also think on this issue, perhaps maybe unlike some other issues that come up, I think this is a sincere impulse on the part of politicians and the electorate. Just as from a rational point of view, more gun safety legislation is something that a lot of people have been wanting for a long time, but politically it was very, very difficult to say so out loud and in public. And now that they are unleashed to say that, I think that it is, in fact, their true sentiment that they would truly like to do this, because it's obvious that we do need more in the way of gun safety regulations in a country that is awash in weapons, more awash than any other nation, well, any other developed nation in the world.
And you had mentioned the bump stock ban. Both of you had alluded to other legislation that would come out, a bump stock ban. For example, do you see Republicans that could jump on board with some version of a background check bill, and then, of course, the bump stock ban as well up in the legislature?
I think it would be a mistake if they did not. And I think it's also comforting to many voters and legislators the fact that we're not just coupling more gun safety rules, but that it's being coupled with mental health. And we're actually, for the first time, not just talking about making changes there. So that's very comforting.
Let's talk a little bit about State of the Union. So this week the president had his State of the Union after the delay due to the shutdown. Hugh, are we at a point where the State of the Union is more, and I guess it has been a political speech, of course, traditionally over the years, but are we getting to the point with social media and technology where it's a necessity to have a State of the Union? Is it just a political speech and that's where we are now? What's your thoughts on the idea of having a State of the Union?
Well, it is in the Constitution that the executive branch is supposed to inform the Congress every year. And George Washington established the precedent of sending a letter. I was thinking on the drive over here, I think I actually saw that once, a copy of that initial letter, and it was a list of here's how much money we're bringing in and here's what we're going to spend it on. And France has been impressing our sailors, so that might be a problem. You know, just but it was a letter, and that was the case up until 1913, when Woodrow Wilson, a bit of a performance artist, decided that he was going to walk over to the Capitol and deliver the State of the Union, and pretty much everybody's been doing it ever since. And then, of course, once you started getting radio and television, then it becomes this ritual, is a national ritual of sorts that everyone looks forward to. Well, maybe not everyone. So should it be eliminated? Is it even, you know, you have to do something. But the other thing, too, to remember is when they were crafting the Constitution in 1787 and 1788, and they write this clause that says that the president has to present, you know, details of what's going on, that was long before you had all these committees set up that were bringing in cabinet officials on a pretty much daily basis, getting briefed on what was going on in the executive branch. I mean, the idea of the speech itself, is it necessary? Absolutely not. It's completely political. It's complete ritual. I guess I'm not opposed to ritual. Sometimes they are interesting things, like when was it Louis Gohmert who yelled "You lie"? That was interesting at Obama. When Bill Clinton, I believe in 1995, said the era of big government is over, I thought that was the true surrender mark of the Democratic Party, when they had completely unconditionally surrendered to the arguments of the right, a real low point in the last 30, 40 years of Democratic history, Democratic Party history. And of course Bush did his axis of evil thing, and that was another memorable moment. But you know, typically these speeches, they come out, they're laundry lists. Clinton was the master of the very long laundry list of we're going to do this in this department, that in that department. And everyone forgets about it, you know, a couple days later. The most notable thing about this year's State of the Union address, of course, was Nancy Pelosi introducing everyone, initiating everyone to the truly insulting applause, which was quite an image. As a matter of fact, at the Current, the Nevada Current, we had a story. We're connected with a lot of other nonprofits around the country, and we have kind of a national bureau. And I knew that they were sending a story, and then we would, you know, put in our local reaction and stuff. And before the State of the Union, I was wondering, am I going to run that? Because, as you say, State of the Union, But then when I saw the Pelosi clap, I was like, oh, well, I want to run that picture. So, so I ended up doing this story.
Well, Amy, I kind of want to get your idea on the merits of State of the Union as well. But let's talk a little bit about, obviously, the president is very good about getting his message out there via Twitter. He has campaign rallies still through the campaign arm. He still goes around the country.
Coming up in El Paso.
One that's exactly the El Paso one that was just announced. So, in your opinion, is this all just pomp and circumstance? Is there a necessity to doing so, or can he just accomplish this through the other channels he already has?
Well, yes to all of that. And he was correct. I mean, that's where, you know, his expertise in political science as being a professor comes into play. So I'm always learning when I'm sitting across from Hugh. But yes, it is pomp and circumstance, but it did help him with his approval rating. And that's where I think somebody like Speaker Pelosi, who's doing something that's condescending like the clap, really hurts her visibly, but helps him. Is he a great orator? No. Did I enjoy his speech and the substance? Yes, absolutely. The State of the Union is supposed to be a snapshot of what's taking place and what you've accomplished and what you'd like to accomplish. What is your vision? And I think he laid it out very well.
With the clap that we've brought up, does that set kind of the theme of how relations are going to be, or does that reinforce the theme of what relations are going to be like now between legislative Democrats and the president?
Well, what set the theme excuse me, for how relations are going to be, and the reason that Pelosi's clap carried the weight that it did, was that she defeated him handily in the government shutdown, and she humiliated him, and he took a bruising loss. And suddenly the idea that the other party controlled the House of Congress came to him as a very rude awakening, and that's the new reality that he's facing now. Subpoenas are going to start being issued. As a matter of fact, they have started to be issued this week. There will be a lot more of them. In fact, Dina Titus from here in Nevada is actually mixed up in one area of this pretty deeply, because she chairs the subcommittee that's going to be looking after that post office lease that Trump has, where he is effectively the landlord and the tenant at the same time. And the General Services Administration completely ignored the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution when they signed off on this thing. And up until now, as Congress has been trying to get any kind of answers out of Trump or the administration has been stonewalling. They haven't been showing up. They've been sending over flunkies. And the Republicans that controlled Congress have abrogated their role as a true third branch of, actually first branch of government, and have not exercised that role as a check against the executive branch. And now all of a sudden that's changing big time. And so the State of the Union and Pelosi's clap was merely a punctuation to all of that. It has really nothing to do with the larger issue, which is that Trump is in a brand new world now, and it's not going to be anything like the last couple of years have been.
We have another deadline, the 15th, coming up with regard to a shutdown. Did the president come out of that wounded, so to speak, now as he tries to have leverage, any type of leverage with legislative Democrats?
With the initial shutdown, yes, he did to a degree, because his base was not happy. Some called it capitulating, some said it was caving, but then others said, well, you know, he had to be the bigger person. Someone had to be the bigger person in the room. Whatever way you view it, it wasn't good overall. He's going to have quite the uphill battle, I believe, going into the 15th. I do know that the bipartisan committee has been meeting. Mick Mulvaney, the interim chief of staff, I believe is pulling everyone aside, or a good portion of the House members aside, this weekend for a retreat to sit down and finally discuss how are we going to approach this. So that'll be interesting to find out what comes of that retreat next week.
Let's talk a little bit about another state issue, but it's not here. We're talking about Virginia. Now, the top 3 officials in the Virginia state government have been a lot of, it's photographs, yearbook photos, blackface. The way we're going, maybe more photographs, more allegations come out. Who knows where this stops? But there is the possibility, if you have to go down the line, that the balance of power switches to Republicans. A Republican could be governor if they were to resign. Now, we're looking far down the list. What is the path forward here, in your opinion, for Democrats in Virginia? What do they need to do to try to put a lid on what's happening right now?
Well, to best of my knowledge, virtually every Democrat in Virginia has called for the governor to resign, and did so within hours of these photographs appearing. And then, of course, it goes down to the lieutenant governor with his sexual, I believe it's sexual assault allegations from when he was younger. And then the third in line, who is it after that? The Attorney General. Yes. And another blackface thing, is that what I have not been? I've not been keeping track of the Old Dominion as closely as perhaps as I should have. So I don't know how all of this is going to shake out, but in our very first colony, as it were, which is what Virginia is, but the society clearly has changed. It's evolved, and things that used to be acceptable are no longer acceptable. And photographs of you when you are in med school in the 1980s from Virginia with blackface is not acceptable. That's absolutely not acceptable. It's not just the blackface issue, of course. It's many different types of perceptions that the country is coming to terms with respect to African Americans in history. Even going back to something like the role of slavery as a cause of the revolution, something that people typically don't like to think about or haven't thought about. But that is something that people are starting to come more to terms with. The Jim Crow and as it's sometimes said, the South lost the Civil War, but they won the battle over what the war was about. And for several decades they did. And so you had Woodrow Wilson at the 50th anniversary of Gettysburg, saying, oh, the quarrel forgotten, let's all just get along. Meantime, there is lynching going on, not a few miles from where he gives this address, and all this discrimination. And then you get a housing system that is built up in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s that effectively keeps African Americans from getting loans to buy homes, from allowing them to generate and amass wealth that then is passed through generations. That actually leaves a legacy to us today. But it's not the kind of thing that typically gets discussed with respect to when something like a blackface issue comes up. It's not just blackface, obviously. It is so many of these other things that America is starting to come to terms with and realizing that we have to move on, we have to evolve, we have to acknowledge the reality of our own history and how we got here. And this incident is part of that. But there's so many much larger structural, institutional, and economic things that are also part of it and that have to be acknowledged as well.
Amy, where does this have to go then? How does this have to play out in Virginia?
I think they just need to burn it to the ground and start all over.
First colony, Amy.
Well, I mean, this is out of control, and this really speaks to their character as well. Whether if we've evolved or not as individuals, how could you even think that was slightly okay back then? And now we've got the discussion wide open to where we're seeing people like Joe Behar, we've got Jimmy Kimmel, we've got plenty of celebrities who are now being caught with photos of doing the same thing. So now that this is definitely, it's open a discussion that is very important. I believe that all three of those folks need to step aside and hopefully elect that Republican into the governor position, and then we can move forward from this. But we are definitely learning as a nation, I hope, from this. This is not okay.
I think there is that suggestion of trying to hit the reset button. Is this finally where the country is beginning to draw the line and saying we need to figure out how to move forward and maybe move on, but move forward in a responsible way?
I think parts of the country have. You have seen a shifting awakening, particularly amongst young people and the priorities they have. A lot of this actually goes back to the economic crash. They grew up in a different world than we did. Actually, I guess you're pretty young, so. But,
thank you, yes, thank you.
But there is a lot of shifting opinion and growing awareness, again, about the history of the country, the true history of the country, and the legacy that it's left and what we need to do to address that going forward. Again, I think this is part of that. In some respects, it's kind of a charismatic megaphone for the media. It's fun to point at and look at, but I would argue that the legacy of racial discrimination and racist housing policies of the last 50 years is actually a much larger problem. And so I would like to see us expand this kind of concern and outrage about this behavior to the public policy legacies that we've established and the need to redress those as well.
Amy, I'll give you the last word if you'd like it.
Well, I was just going to add that I think it would have been much better for Governor Northam if he would have just apologized instead of going back and forth and saying, oh, yes, that was me, but I'm not going to tell you I'm the one in the KKK hood or I'm the one in the blackface. And then the next day going, oh, wait, no, that wasn't me. Just kidding. That really paints a bad picture for him overall. He's not honest. His character is very bad. And I don't think he should remain in office.
All right, well, we need to leave it there for this week, but we really do appreciate both of you coming in. Thank you so much.